I'm Indian American. My parents came here in the 50s. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. I was born in Trieste, Italy through a strange fluke, but I grew up in Boulder. And I'm probably part of the first major generation of children of Indian immigrants. So, I mean, I obviously come from a jazz tradition. I mean, I listen to Charlie Parker as much as anybody, if not more, and Coltrane and everybody else. But in trying to kind of, being part of this first generation, I've been more concerned with trying to express what it means to inhabit this hybrid identity on 24 hours a day, and somehow define that not only for myself but for my people. And I think jazz at its core is a diasporic music. It's been a wonderful way for hyphen American cultures to express themselves and define their identity in this country. So I would say since like the mid-90s, I would say, I became more serious about trying to find ways in which jazz and Indian music can kind of cross and intersect and commingle in a way that's actually meaningful. Because there have been lots of Indo-jazz fusion projects that go back to the 60s, which have always struck me, well, not always, I don't want to generalize all of them, but there's a lot of cut and paste, there's a lot of exoticism, there's a lot of Indian musicians and Western musicians playing in the same room but not necessarily playing together. And so it was really important to me to kind of find a way where these artistic concepts and ideas can really meld in a way that yields something else, that yields that transcends being Indian or being American.
About the language question. So you didn't grow up speaking a South Indian language at all?
The language my parents speak is called Kannada. And I've gone through several periods of being like, yeah, I'm going to learn Kannada finally, but I can't really get past the alphabet, So there's an album I released in 2004 called Mother Tongue, where all the compositions are melodic transcriptions of Indians answering the question, do you speak Indian? Because there's no such language as Indian, but it's a question that's plagued me for many years, where people would say, they'd either ask me if I speak Indian or if I speak Hindu, and then you have to go through this whole rigmarole of like, there's no such language as Indian, there are, 19, 17 languages that are recognized by the Indian Constitution, and then there are regional dialects, and then there are just languages that aren't even recognized, that are spoken in rural areas, that are just their own thing. So that was a really fun album to make, because I had Indian language speakers, all different Indian language speakers, answer that question, and then I just kind of used the melody and rhythm of their response and wrote these pieces with that. And so that was really cool. That was my little soapbox at the time.
So this kind of begs the question then, on the one hand, if you're looking at, or were more inspired by models that married African things with jazz, you could see that because it's kind of a natural bridge, because we could say that's what jazz sort of came out of, the African tradition. Sure. In translation, in context.
Right.
But Indian music has some similarities, but it's obviously very different. It's a very different tradition. So kind of two questions. One is, what then is jazz for you versus, the Indian approach to improvisation, the African approach to improvisation? And then, well, I guess let's start with that, because that's kind of a humongous question.
Wow, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I mean, I think...
But do you see what I'm saying? In other words, where's the kind of dividing line? If you still think of yourself as a jazz musician...
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I still see Bird at the very root. I mean, if somebody, sometimes after a gig, someone says, well, where did your, harmonic, melodic language come from? I mean, for me, it's like, it's Bird, but it's just tipped a little. It's no different than like Picasso moving the eye over here and this kind of opening up a perspective, you know? So for me, it's the most important thing is that jazz represent what's now, and what's now for me, you know, that it have one foot in the past and one foot in the future at all times, and the result is the present, you know. So I'm kind of always looking for, because for me all the jazz that pushed this music forward was always forward thinking, you know. It was never, I mean, I can't think of any figure that was playing an older style than the time that he or she was living in that made a huge, huge difference in this music. Difference in this music, well, that's kind of loaded, I guess, but actually, you know, push the boundaries. And it's also important to realize that jazz has always had a social importance beyond the music. I mean, it's not just music. It's a music of social action. It's a voice of social action. And I feel like that has to maintain and for it to be relevant. And I think people are doing that. I mean, the world is broken open now. I mean, there's so many ways one can do that. I mean, I'm trying to do that by somehow trying to represent or speak for, you know, my particular generation and ethnicity. You know, and then you have, you know, the way Robert Glasper is dealing with hip hop is also very socially important. You know, I think, and I mean the way Miguel Zenon is dealing with the music of, you know, of his roots and his ancestry. I mean, I think all of this music is very much now. It's very contemporary. It's kind of, it's speaking to a current and concerned population. So, I mean, that's what the music is to me. You know, it's not just the music. It's really, it's about life force. It's about making people think. It's about giving people a voice and a means to communicate.
So I have a quick question. When you talk about using Indian music to inform and make a true fusion versus a kind of stapled on or something,
Right.
So you're actually using the like talas, the rhythmic cycles, or are just a loose interpretation of them, or?
Well, it varies from piece to piece and album to album, but generally, yes. The short answer is yes. And the ragas too. You know, ragas are these beautiful melodic structures that end up getting dumbed down a lot when they're talked about in Western terms, because people think about them as modes and scales and try to see everything as like a major or minor scale mode, but they're much more complicated than that. And a lot of them will have a different, the ascending form and descending form will be different. There'll be maybe some notes that you avoid going up that you don't going down, or vice versa. But there's also this whole concept of what they call gamaka, which is this melodic ornamentation that's actually kind of woven into the raga itself. So it's not that you're hitting the pitch right on. There's actually a sense of how it's approached and how the note is decorated. That's actually part of the raga itself. So it's quite different than the Western concept of scales. And it's also important to note that Indian music, classical Indian music, as opposed to like the Bollywood stuff and the soundtrack to Slumdog Millionaire, has no harmony. You know, it's oftentimes an Indian ensemble will be a lead melodic instrument, an accompanying melodic instrument that often, you know, kind of echoes and accompanies in a linear fashion, one or two rhythmic instruments, and a drone. So somewhere in there is a polyphony that I think the end result between the polyphony and the ornamentation, I think there is the kind of a sense of harmony, but it's not actually harmony. You know, I mean, Indian classical musicians don't deal with chords. You know, they don't deal with 5/1. They don't, you know, they don't deal with any of that. So But they make up for it in all these different ways, and there is a fullness of sound that's actually rather remarkable from when you look at it from a Western perspective when you're used to hearing chords. And obviously I play in lots of groups that involve chords, so I'm always trying to figure out how to create harmony that's not just like taking the raga and breaking it up into thirds and saying, okay, well, here are the chords, we harmonized it. I'm kind of thinking of alternative strategies to deal with that as well.
I mean, that's one of the things that I'm listening to that and thinking when you're talking about jazz or, again, African music or a lot of these related musics, it's duple meter, it's 2 and 4 in the play with 3 over
Right.
that and stuff. But Indian music, the melodic and the rhythmic thing is the major organizing principle as opposed to bop, which has the heavy harmonic thing. So
Right.
how do you start to internalize these 7s and 21s? Do you break them down into, or does it just after a while become intuitive?
Well, it definitely becomes intuitive. I mean, for me, the easiest way to tackle those beat cycles was to write tunes that use those and just try to play those tunes with your band.
And then so you feel the melody and then you go, and that kind of reinforces the rhythm and vice versa.
Right, and I think it's important to try to hear the rhythm melodically, in the sense that, with the Indian drumming and with the African drumming, there is a drum language. I mean, you could spend the rest of your life learning it, but it's not just 7 beats. Which drum you're hitting and which way, which head of the drum is very specific.
Like the bass tones mark certain
exactly, or the
shapes
high
of
one
the
will accent another part of the beat. So you have to kind of hear it that way. Another thing that really helped me a lot was to write a lot of tunes that had odd meter tunes that had a bass line that I could, really internalize. So I feel like a lot of the way I've been able to internalize rhythm is to think of it as a bass line, or to even imagine a bass line, whether it's there or not, something that's marking it in kind of a melodic way. And I think if you find people that want to explore that same territory, you just work on it together. You write these tunes, and after a while it becomes intuitive, and you don't think twice about it. I mean, you're hearing 7, all of us can, if we're playing blues, we're not thinking about each measure, right? We're thinking about 4 bars, or we're thinking about an entire chorus, We're seeing like the bigger shape, and I think it's the same thing with these odd meters. I mean, if you want to play in 13, the thing that you could do the worst thing you could do is count to 13. I mean, that's like the worst thing you could possibly do. And you have to break it down into 2s and 3s. I mean, you have to hear kind of like an underlying, a clave of sorts, how it breaks up, how you break it down, and hear those bigger beats. And actually, instead of 2s and 3s, if you just think of everything in longs and shorts, you'll be fine. 2 is short and 3 is long. I mean, once you start thinking about it like that, you can play in any meter you want. Okay, so check out the rhythm while we're working on that. So the rhythm is... You can play keep that, but it could be kind of a backbeat thing, but with that in mind.
think I got the notes, now the rhythm.
Okay, well, 4 3 2 3 2 3 4.